All right, I think we are live. Hello to everyone who is out there. I'm just going to get a couple things situated and then we will get started. All right. Um, Hello, everyone. I know it's a weird night. I will be back tomorrow night for the usual show, but if you are watching this, this is a pre recording of a podcast we are going to air next week. And as always, if you have any questions, leave them in the chat. I will check that and we'll raise it as we go along here. All right. Kate Shellnutt is the editorial director of news for Christianity Today. She has been a religion reporter and an editor for more than 15 years, previously at the Houston Chronicle. Her work has appeared in the Washington Post, the New York Times, and Vox, and she's been recognized by the Religion News Association and the Evangelical Press Association. I have known her since she was a college student outside of Chicago, and I wanted to talk to her because she just spent the past week at the Southern Baptist Convention's annual meeting. And I feel like I should just get this out of the way now. Kate is Christian. I am very clearly not. We are not here to debate beliefs or policy. I wanted to speak to her because she has direct insight into what's going on at the SBC, and I really respect the articles she writes about what's happening in the Christian world. And again, if you have questions as we are going through this, leave them in the comments, and I will make sure to ask. But here we go. Hi, Kate. How are you doing? I muted you. I'm going to try that again. Hello, Kate. How are you doing?
I'm still great. Yes.
Excellent. So let me start off by just asking you to set the scene for us, for people who may not be familiar with why this is a big deal. Why is this meeting actually important? Because like Jehovah's Witnesses gather, they have an annual meeting too, but you don't see national news coverage about it. What is the significance of this particular gathering of Southern Baptists?
Right. There's a few reasons that we pay particular attention, both as like the Christian world, and also kind of the watching world in the national news. Like you said, it's the largest Protestant denomination in the country, and so when they get together as Southern Baptists to talk about issues, to debate things, to make changes, to raise forward like the things that they're dealing with, a lot of times it's representative of what a lot of churches are dealing with, and this is just kind of the most prominent platform for it to be on. The other thing is it's just notable for its sheer scope and size. It's not only the largest denominational gathering, but it's the largest democratically run business meeting in the world, like using Robert's Rules of Order with more than 10,000 people in seats in a convention hall, voting on issues and debating stuff from microphones and things. And so yeah, we go in and look and see not just what people are saying from the top, because Southern Baptists are a convention and technically not a denomination, which means they're autonomous congregations that come together. The churches are independent and choose to affiliate. And so there's a lot of people who aren't pastors who are there, kind of everyday people who come and they can vote. And you get this kind of mix of lots of different people types just because of how kind of wide ranging the convention is and the sheer size of the people gathered.
So one question I was trying to figure out is, approximately how many million Southern Baptists are out there and how many are showing up to this convention?
Right. So the numbers are there are 20 or 12.7 million who identify as Southern Baptists. And this is a number that's been on the decline probably for the past like 15 years, but they're not declining as fast and haven't been declining as long as the other denominations. So they have a little bit of a head start and they were bigger in the first place. Of those
12.5 million is nothing to sneeze at either.
Right. Their peak, they were at over 16 million at one point. But of those, about 4.5 million attend church every Sunday, right? So it's one of those things where some people might affiliate or be members of churches and not kind of off the rolls, even if they don't attend anymore. And then the way that people get to go to this meeting and vote on the business is it's proportionate to the size of your church and how much your church gives to the denomination. So if you're at a tiny church, it might be just like the pastor and his wife, or the pastor and another guy who comes. But if you're at a mega church, it might be the kind of thing where you're allowed to seat as many as 25 people, and you might come as a whole group all together in a bus or something. And so yeah, so that's the way they kind of have a proportionate representation kind of thing.
That's
So
interesting. So they
yeah,
had like what, 10,000 people there this weekend
yeah,
who are voting on whatever might be up for
right.
grabs?
So 10,000 folks who are eligible to cast ballots. And so in addition to that, there might be people who come as guests. There's a whole children's like setup. So people bring their kids and they don't count towards the voting. And then there's a huge exhibit hall too, which itself is giant. I wish I could recall the square footage, but it's everything from the Southern Baptist seminaries to like people who make church seating and light, church light displays, and
Here's my
who do
homeschool curriculum.
insurance, all of that kind of stuff. And there's probably hundreds more that count there. So I might say all in all, it could be as much as 12 to 15,000 people, and then the 10,000 who come to vote as messengers.
So this is interesting to me because those 10,000 messengers who are there and voting on these issues, they're essentially setting the course for the entire convention, though, and what pastors may be preaching about, what the official stance of the SBC is, even though that sounds like a very disproportionately small number of people when we were talking about Southern Baptists as a whole.
Yeah. And so it's a kind of funny structure to have it both ways, where on the one hand there's plenty of Southern Baptist churches that don't care about what happens at the annual meeting because it's not hierarchical. So they can operate their church on their own a little bit regardless of what happens, what the business of the convention itself is. The only requirements to belong to the Southern Baptist Convention is that you agree with their statement of faith, and don't do anything kind of in major violation of that, and that you give towards the missions that they do together. So the whole point is that there's this group of churches that pools their money together to fund things like seminaries and sending missionaries out and doing humanitarian relief work. And so basically they said, is there a way for us to kind of make the most of our donation dollars and like have a bigger impact together without forcing everybody to come into compliance with who hires and fires pastors, or how the church is organized, or
Unlike the
the
Catholic Church,
style.
which is
So
super
unlike
hierarchical.
Catholics, unlike Anglicans,
Hierarchical.
unlike even Methodists, anyone who has like a bishop of like kind of a group that rules over, there's none of that in Southern Baptist. And so they both want to be able to operate together to pool this money and kind of be effective, but they also don't want anyone telling them what to do. So there's a very independent spirit among everything.
Which is interesting because
So
every time I hear about, and by the way, I should have mentioned this year's convention happened in Dallas,
we're in
Texas.
Dallas. Yep.
Um, every year we hear about like, oh, Southern Baptists or the messengers voted on this issue and that issue.
Right.
But basically, what does that actually mean for the members and the churches that are part of the SBC if they can say, well, this isn't part of like the core canon,
Yeah.
so whatever.
Yes. And so sometimes it's funny to see the level of debate over stuff that's essentially non-binding, and people want to go back and forth word over what this actually says, when really it doesn't you can't compel behavior by anybody to do anything because of how independent they like to preserve themselves. And so a number of the big things that kind of make headlines are these resolutions that they do. And so basically it's like a positional statement of, hey, we've all voted here, and if we have to say something, this is something that at least the group that's gathered here can agree upon. And they do it almost for the sake of witness, just to, this is something we should weigh in on.
Get it
But
on paper.
but if a church disagrees with it, nobody's going to come after them and say, "Hey, we all agreed on this, and you weren't there, but we're going to make you go with it." And it's a little bit for better or for worse, because there's been some where you're like, "Oh, that might be a good thing for everyone to agree on." One of them, and it's nice to at least have it out there, because maybe the idea is maybe it gets people to think more about some of these issues to
And
get on the same page.
we'll talk
Um,
about some of the specific
yeah.
resolutions they brought up in just a little bit.
Yeah,
Before we get into that, can you, for people who may not be familiar with, like, what were the big debates, not this year,
sure.
but for the past couple of years, what were some of the more contentious issues, maybe helping us set the scene for what this year, what were people anticipating
Yeah.
before the meeting actually started?
So I would say the two biggest issues, and if we're looking over a large period of several years, um, are that we've seen play out in the Southern Baptist Convention are also two issues that I think affect Christians and evangelical Christians and conservative Christians more generally. I think one issue that's like in background, and then also in the forefront at times is the response to Donald Trump's presidency, both in 2016, his candidacy before that, and then now in the 2020 race, and then now that he is reelected. So we've seen obviously a majority of Southern Baptists, a majority of evangelicals are Trump voters, but we see that kind of like that range of how serious they are about expecting the church to fall in line with Trump, how much they vote for him because of who he is versus despite who he is, and how much they expect agreement with fellow believers in their denomination
Do
or
they actually
religion.
vote on any resolution concerning Trump directly? I know they have discussed in previous years, like, issues such as immigration and things like that, but I don't, like, correct me if I'm wrong. Did they actually do anything regarding Trump specifically?
No, so not at the annual meeting. There have been a couple of debates that are like politically relevant in terms of like they once invited Mike Pence to speak before the whole convention, and after that it was kind of divisive enough, and this was before Pence and Trump's falling out. It was back when they were still kind of buddy buddy. That it was divisive enough that they said, "Oh, we're not going to invite political candidates to speak before the whole convention anymore. Instead, we're just going to have like a pastor preach or like the one of the officers of the convention give an
Okay.
address." So there are some things of like how much should politics be part of this meeting, but the Southern Baptists also have a public policy arm that is in charge of advocacy and lobbying, just like a lot of nonprofits and interest groups do. They have offices in Washington. They're involved in in political issues and directly involved with what happens or want to be directly involved with what happens at the White House. And so kind of the ways that Southern Baptists respond or direct to or approve or don't approve of that group, they're called the Ethics and Religious Liberty Commission. Before that, they were called the Christian Life Commission, I believe. But essentially, it's public policy, it's politics and lobbying, and there's been a big divide over that really stems from their approval or disapproval of Trump, of Trump's policies, and characterizations of Trump voters dating back to 2015, I would say. Yeah.
And even if the ERLC has sometimes been critical of Trump, again, that doesn't necessarily mean everyone has to fall in line. And I think what you're referring to is maybe the ERLC said one thing, but a lot of the SBC faithful voted a very different way, believe something very different. And so there's that tension.
Right. And so what we're seeing emerge, and I think that you can see this split in some churches and other kinds of communities outside of the SBC, is almost like an ultra conservative wing or subset of folks that it feels weird to call one conservative and one not conservative because they both would absolutely fall in theological conservatives and political conservatives.
Right. I
But
would call them all conservative, but
right.
the nuance between
But
those two.
so some become, well, you're not conservative enough for us, and really are taking much more hardline stances than we've seen in the past, or just have little patience, or accuse folks who are kind of in that traditionally conservative, mainline conservative area of being of liberal drift, of cultural accommodation, when really it seems just like the center of gravity is shifting, and we see that under Trump.
This is an interesting question. Which, when we're talking about the non ultra conservative Southern
Sure.
Baptists, what policies of Trump's do they typically speak out against?
So especially in the first election that Trump had, and right at the beginning, even the Access Hollywood tapes era, it was very much the fact that he was divorced multiple times, that he spoke about women in a sexual way. It was kind of this morality of, do we trust this kind of person whose morals seem questionable to us? And can
And
we
some of
go
the most famous Southern Baptist leaders said as much at the
right.
time.
Right. And so at first it was kind of like his personal character was the deal breaker, and his tone of, is this person it tonally the kind of person who represents like what we would see as decorum in a political setting. Um as things have gone on, the places where you might see like the ERLC in different stances, maybe stuff around immigration. They're a part of a group called the Evangelical Immigration Table, which is advocating for immigration reform, and more comprehensive immigration reform. So that's one that's kind of easier to point to, that of a clear difference. But now at this point, it's the fact that this evangelical group doesn't have direct inroads, isn't buddy with Trump. Like when you see that group of
You're talking about the
the
ERLC or
RLC, so the public policy entity of the Southern Baptist Convention, they're actually still very close with Mike Pence. They hosted Mike Pence last year at a convention in Indianapolis, and I heard Mike Pence speak directly, very much praising them for their work on pro-life stuff, talking about the reversal of Roe v. Wade and how this entity of the SBC helped kind of develop that. But anyone who still listens to Mike Pence and cares about his opinion is probably not someone who's still on the Trump side of things. And
sure.
so Mike Pence's endorsement doesn't mean anything to
Which,
folks who are sold out for Trump.
so the bottom line here is the public policy arm of the Southern Baptist Convention, which is ridiculously conservative, is ironically not in cahoots with Trump, even though I'm guessing there's a ton of overlap with
Right. And
policies.
so there's a handful of pastors who have influence on their own, who themselves are Southern Baptists. So again, when you picture that circle around him, those people who get invited to the White House, there are Southern Baptist pastors who are part of that. But they're not the ones who are like holding the institutional line for the SBC. And so
Okay.
there's kind of this difference of that. And yeah, this idea of, I don't know, the court evangelicals is one term of that people have called it.
The inner circle of people
Yeah,
around
yeah.
Trump.
And so people just worry, oh, do you really have influence if you're not that close to him? And the people who are that close to him are considered to be kind of to not have a critical voice towards it. And so some people say part of like the witness would be to say when they disagree, not just when they agree. So it's kind of that line.
So tell me, for the people who attend the annual meeting, as you were saying, even though I would probably consider all of them conservative, what sort of people are attending this convention? Is it primarily people? I mean, you're not coming to this convention if you don't care. These
Yeah.
are people who are very interested in the future of the SBC, but some of them may be saying this is not conservative enough. We need to push even harder in that direction. And some people very much want to make it liberal, and I use giant quote hands
Yeah.
there. What's the split there? Because I imagine, I mean, I'm going to play conspiracy theorist for a second. If I wanted the SBC to go super conservative, I'm talking to all my conservative buddies around the country and saying, we're all going to the convention. We're all going to vote, and we're going to like force their hand on this stuff. It doesn't sound like that's typically what happens, but like, what's the breakdown? Is it mostly the people wanting to push it to the right, to the left? Don't really
Yeah.
care either way?
Yeah, and so sometimes people do think it depends on the city that it's in, right? Because it's like who's gonna travel to be there. It
We're in
matters
Dallas, Texas,
who shows
right?
up in the
So
room. So the funny thing about Texas, you might have your assumptions. We are like in Bible Belt, Texas, but there are actually 2 state conventions in Texas, and one is like more thought to be more conservative, more traditionally Southern Baptist, and one is more like broadly Baptist. So it's the Southern Baptist of Texas and the Baptist General Convention of Texas. So Baptist General Convention of Texas used to be affiliated with like Baylor, versus the Southern Baptist. And so because you have that mix, the thought is actually that you might have more mainline voices just because of the makeup of the state conventions being that way. When it was in Nashville, which is literally the headquarters for Southern Baptist, that was in 2021, 5 years ago. And that was where we saw, or at least heard talk of, the most concerted efforts. This was when a group came up called the Conservative Baptist Network, where they were like kind of the ultra conservative of, we think there's liberal drift, we want to reclaim the denomination. And that was the talk of busing people in from some of the bigger conservative churches in
So they
Georgia.
have tried this in the
And
past.
so there have been efforts, and it's a vocal minority, and they've been able to rally people, but it hasn't been enough to shift the needle, other than to hear them out a lot more. It hasn't been enough to get majorities to vote in the folks that might be their candidates, or to make reform efforts. And so some of those things we've seen fail now repeatedly, but again, have enough momentum that they get a hearing.
Okay. So let's talk about some of the resolutions that came up this week. I'm skipping around my own question,
Sure.
but I'll come back to some of these in a little bit. So these are just some of the ones I heard that they voted on. I'm sorry if I'm missing any of them. So one of the things they voted to do this time around was to denounce gambling and sports betting,
Yeah.
which I didn't know I cared what Southern Baptists thought about that. But okay, I mean, I don't necessarily have a problem with that. I wonder if it's like too little too late at this point.
I think it's an interesting one because it's one that we at Christianity Today have been trying to cover for a while.
Like,
And
what's the Christian response to the increase of gambling and sports betting apps?
yeah, of Christians maybe having more of a moral hold to make a case against it, than, like, maybe this is a place where Christians are uniquely positioned to help or speak into it, to help with addiction, that kind of thing. Just knowing, knowing how much money is spent, how much advertising is spent, the dollars are crazy. Also knowing what it means for college athletes, and seeing the effects of, on them, and the kind of threats that they get now that people bet on games.
Because you didn't make the spread, and I'm gonna
Right.
come after you.
So seeing kind of an ethical dimension to this conversation. And so they've done, before this, the Southern Baptists have a survey mechanism that's pretty well trusted. It's called Lifeway. We trust the numbers that they do. They don't just survey Southern Baptists, they survey all Protestants, but the numbers that they've given have shown that most evangelical pastors do oppose sports betting. Very few say that they themselves participate, but also few say that they're doing anything about it. And
Right.
so
I mean, I can't remember hearing a ton of sermons or clips that have
right.
ever gone viral about that particular subject.
And so this is possibly a push to kind of get it in front of people to say, you may not realize that your state probably legalizes sports betting. I think Texas, Georgia, and maybe California are big holdouts, but there's only 11 states left that don't do it.
Mm.
And so because these things are going to be popping up more and more, and it's an issue to like minister or help young people, because a lot of times it is young people on their phones, who kind of get wrapped up in it. So I think it's maybe a call to awareness of, hey,
Okay.
this is such a big thing, and you could be paying attention and speaking into it for people at your church,
Okay.
that kind of thing.
Another thing they voted on was to ban ban or criminalize adult content online. What
My
exactly does that mean, though? Like, are they just saying every adult website needs age verification requirements across the country? Or did they actually say, no, we want it to be criminalized? Because it's one thing to say we oppose it because of child trafficking or anything
right.
like that. I get that. But what's the concern here, and what are they actually voting for? What did they
This
vote for?
this one had one of my favorite reactions online when I tweeted about it, because someone said, "Oh, are they banning porn from church?" And I said, "No, like from the internet." And someone said, "I didn't know Southern Baptists had the power to do that, to ban porn from the internet." So yes, what they're advocating for, and obviously there's never been a time where Southern Baptists were for pornography, and
Right.
most of the times it has been their kind of advocacy or position efforts have been in the case of because of minors
Right.
who might be involved. This is a more broad stance.
No, we don't want adults watching it either.
This is saying anyone who posts, produce, distributes, puts up, is involved in pornography, that they want both state and federal laws to bar it. And I think I see this kind of twofold. One, they praised the Take It Down Act, which was the deep
Revenge.
fakes and
Oh, yeah.
revenge porn
Yeah.
thing that was signed into law by Donald Trump last month, and saw that as like kind of a model legislation of like acting fast with a ban. They do specifically call out age verification laws as like one kind of law, but I think that the kind of like fuddy-duddy, oh, people are just like wet blankets for opposing porn, that there are more secular folks who are kind of coming around to the dangers of places like Pornhub, where it's almost impossible to get abuse material
Right.
taken down, to get non-consensual porn taken
Nick
down,
Kristof in the New York Times has
all of
written
that kind of thing.
extensively on that
And
stuff.
so I think basically they're saying, one, we've always opposed it as like a sexual activity that we see as addictive and harmful and hurting marriages, but now we actually don't see an ethical way for porn to be distributed online to the scale that it is now, and we think it's basically it's all a problem.
And this
And
is where I'm curious what the reaction is, because what happens, like the stuff we are talking about right now, I mean, it's hard for me to even think of a defense of any of that stuff. What I'm trying to wonder is, like, there are consenting adults who produce it. I mean, there's a whole conversation about ethical porn, things like
right,
that. So when they are saying we want to criminalize it, do the age verification stuff, do all that, they want to basically they want to get rid of it on the internet. Good luck with that. But also, like, there is no nuance in what I am hearing between
right.
stuff that may be produced by consenting adults versus the sort of stuff that really doesn't have any backers. It's just bad stuff.
Yeah. And when we do see surveys of Christians in general and pornography, one, they're more likely to admit porn use. That it used to be like, right, so shameful that you could never say, "Oh, I sometimes watch porn." So now more people are admitting it, and fewer people have a problem with it. More people are saying it is possible to have a healthy sexual relationship and not be a terrible, addicted, sex
Right.
riddled, cheating person if you watch porn. And I think because of that, Baptist.
Oop, I'm losing you just a little bit, Kate. I'll bring that back until I have you back. Um, we'll talk about that in just a second. We'll continue with that as soon as I get Kate back. As I said earlier, if you have questions about any of the stuff we are talking about, Kate and I are not debating these particular issues. I just wanted her feedback on what's going on at the SBC. So I'm just going to stall for a few minutes until she comes back. If you have any questions about what happened at the convention, what they voted on, I have a bunch of topics I do want to get to before we run out of time here. So I will get to all of those things. And just double checking, we'll get her back in just a bit. I'll make a little note to myself. How are you all doing? She's coming back in just a bit. I appreciate your questions. I am looking at the comments as we are going through this. And some of them are very interesting. I agree. Some of the people are debating and discussing the things we are talking about right now about age verification. You know, what's that going to do? You can just get out of that if you want to. I think Kate is back. I'm going to bring her back here. Hello again. Welcome.
I hope you just completed my thoughts on pornography and you're like,
I
"Oh, no,
did.
that's
I
fine."
just
Okay.
told them all of your thoughts on this topic, and you won't love any of it.
Here we go.
No, let me just to move on to the
Sure,
other
sure.
stuff they discussed on this particular subject. They also voted at the convention to what did they say about abortion pills? Because I know they are anti-abortion. What specifically did they vote on when it comes to pills?
There was a recent report that was out from it's called the Ethics and Public Policy. There's a C in it, Commission
That's okay.
Council. Oh no.
Uh-huh.
It's a Christian kind of ethics public policy group in DC, and the Southern Baptists referenced this new report from them that talks about abortion pills being so much more dangerous than are reported, that the numbers are actually much higher of people who have to be hospitalized and who hemorrhage. And so the case that they're making is that abortion pills are just as unethical to them as abortion. And now because they make up such a higher percentage of the number of abortions in this country, post COVID, just where the
So
landscape
when
of
they're
abortion.
voting on this resolution, what they're basically saying is we want to urge Southern Baptists and pastors to speak out against the pills and try to get them to try to criminalize if they are getting mailed from one state to
Exactly,
another.
exactly. Yep. That Comstock Act, the legal portion, the argument there that it's that they shouldn't be mailed, and also warning women. So they position it as, hey, women are being tricked into thinking this is healthy. So we think both it's like dangerous for them, and we think it's just as bad. It is an abortion, and so we oppose it with that full force.
This is a bunch of people are commenting on this in particular, which is to say, again, I know Southern Baptists are against abortion in general. Is there any nuance or any voices that say these statistics are untrue? The things that you are believing when we are voting on this stuff, that it counts as murder, that it's unhealthy for women. Is there pushback against any of those beliefs, these core beliefs that are making up why they're voting on this issue? Or is it just a broad consensus that, yes, we're against abortion, therefore the pills are bad and wrong, and we want to end that as well?
Yeah, there have been some back and forth about that particular report saying, hey, if you're relying just on people who file for their insurance, like that's not representative, because plenty of people get abortion pills without using insurance, and those would be the ones who kind of don't need the medical things. So the numbers may not be as high as are reported there. And then there is what's called this abolitionist. And so remember we talked about the ultra conservative, it's the abolitionist coalition within the SBC. This is a very small but vocal group that cares a lot about any time abortion is mentioned, criminalizing abortion as murder. So anything that comes up that doesn't use the word murder in it, someone will come to a microphone and say, hey, can we amend this to reword people who use abortion pills to say murderers who use abortion pills? And none of those things pass, and these people are very insistent and frustrated. But it's not the
A
majority
vocal minority.
of Southern Baptists, most of whom are very compassionate towards people who get abortions. They really see moms as like, how can we help them? How can we make them not be in a position to decide for abortion? They really want to love them out of getting abortions, I would say is the position of most Southern Baptists, versus people who say, no, I want them to go to jail
Right.
because they got an abortion. I think
Okay.
there are people who are arguing that, and they're mad that that's not the official position of the denomination, but it isn't.
Which is hilarious, and none of this is funny, but it's hilarious to me because at no point would I associate anyone involved in any part of that debate as even remotely on my side of the issue on any of that.
Right. These are all people who would be considered very staunchly pro-life and not
Right.
shaking in those things, but some of them are not pro-life enough for the others. Yes,
Because they don't call people who have abortions murderers.
that's true. Yes.
They also voted to overturn Obergefell. And what was that resolution and what was that vote?
Sure. This is a kind of an interesting one, and one that I would like to explain a little, because yes, they did vote on that. The word Obergefell was never mentioned. The word gay marriage was never mentioned,
Of
and this
course
was
not.
never discussed. So this is a 1,200 word resolution that everyone got to read and a vote to approve. It had a ton of stuff about everything from transgender folks in sports to surrogacy to basically it was like kind of all those things about marriage
A whole
and gender
resolution that involves
changing,
LGBTQ
LGBT
everything.
stuff or assisted reproduction stuff or marriage, like, hey, just so you know, we're against all of them, and here are
One
every line
big,
by line.
beautiful resolution.
Yes. And so, yes, it was passed, but was it, if you asked, you could have even asked people in the room, did you just pass something to overturn the legalization of gay marriage, and they might have not thought that that was it. The only discussion was really they had a discussion only about the sports element, like the men and
Right,
women's
right, right.
that
Truly
thing.
the only issue affecting our
But I
country
will
right
say
now.
the guy who authored the resolution has, prior to this, made a case for overturning Obergefell publicly on a Christian and evangelical platform, and he kind of talks about it as, "Hey, there's no political will for this." So he admits, "This isn't something that I think is likely or maybe even possible or a short-term goal," but he basically says Christians shouldn't give up on a position or not say that they want something to be a different way
Because
just
years
because.
ago they were against marriage equality. They still are against marriage equality, but saying, "Hey, let's advocate, let's lobby to overturn Roe v. Wade, overturn Obergefell," it's probably not going to get anywhere. Even though I know on my side of the fence, plenty of people fear the Supreme Court's going to do it as soon as they get a chance to, which is not something you can lobby for necessarily.
Right. I mean, I think that so he did cite of like his like glimmers of hope, and this is a man who is a seminary professor, an ethicist, in the Southern Baptist Convention. As he talked about, is there a kind of a leveling off on support for gay marriage? Have we reached the peak of it?
Which the polls have kind of showed it's going lower
And
instead of
then
up.
right, and then is there, on the transgender issue, is there now kind of a more questioning from medical, from people socially who are less comfortable with the T in LGBT, and maybe saying, "Hey, is this a place where Southern Baptist, conservative Christians, people who oppose same-sex marriage have inroads to, like, continue to be that voice and witness to advocate for male-female marriages?" So basically saying, like, "Don't let's not lose the opportunity if tides could be slightly shifting." And again, I don't know that you will see signs in Washington or proposals there, but it's this thing of saying, "We actually don't have to give up just because it's been 10 years. We can still hold this stance that we held before,
Okay.
and be vocal about it." So I
One
think that's his perspective. Go ahead.
when I was following them discussing this issue and voting on this particular resolution, one question I was trying to figure out is for the people supporting that particular position of overturning Obergefell, marriage equality is no longer a nationwide thing. It returns back to the states. It's not like you have to go down a slippery slope here to figure out what comes next. If it goes back to the states, some of these states will just say, okay, marriage equality is no longer valid in
Mhm,
our state. And what does I have not heard an answer about this from conservative Christians, Southern Baptists. What happens to those families who now, on paper, do not have the same rights and may not like? I'm wondering, have they thought through what happens if people with valid marriage licenses have those revoked all of a sudden, how that might really impact, hurt a family? I haven't really heard them discuss that. And I'm wondering if, am I just missing that? Have people talked through what that would actually mean at this point if Southern Baptists, by and large, got what they wanted in this particular case? I could say this about abortion too, things like that.
right. I don't know that anyone's thought about it at the scale of a state or nation level, but I do know that, testimonies are shared from Southern Baptist pastors, and I can one of them was a former SBC president, one of them is another major voice in the denomination, where they talk about I mean, they have had gay families join their church, right? So if a gay couple comes to your church or a gay couple with children, that's a real thing that happens on a very like one-on-one, right, level. And so the question isn't purely hypothetical for a pastor in the year 2025. What happens if a gay couple wanders into your church, hears a sermon, is interested, wants to learn more, maybe wants to debate with you about
Uh-huh.
where does the Bible say this or that about marriage? And so what do you do then? And a lot of people see it as you can't just say, "Oh, just because you're married means that you get to stay married." The idea is that a pastor who opposes same-sex marriage when a couple comes to them does it, that they don't say, "Well, you're good and like grandfathered in and can just be a Christian and still be in a same-sex marriage." Their expectation would be that these people move out, like live in different houses, start coming and living their lives differently. And people have asked, yeah, what does that mean if they have children? And I think they see that as like part of the broken consequences of what they see as like not, hey, this wasn't God's design for marriage, which is like the language that they use in this resolution and throughout. And so part of that is going to be the brokenness and the hurt of something that wasn't meant to be in the first place, not able to do it. So that would be, I think, how some of the pastors would explain the consequences of, no, we don't just let everybody stay in their gay marriages. But I don't know, because the other thing is that some of these people are libertarians, and fiercely care about like independent rights, and that
Right.
I bet there are people who, I mean, I know there are who don't necessarily see the church's definition of marriage as being the country's definition. And there's also a
Right.
counter push that's not reflected in this resolution, but I know that some folks believe that they actually just want to see the separation of religious marriage from
A
state
state
marriage.
marriage. Okay.
And so that's another like counter position that you would have. Yeah.
Interesting. Oh, so one of the biggest resolutions that was being debated at this meeting is dealing with female pastors. And so, what was the concern going into this event? What did they actually vote on that? And yeah, I'll leave it at that.
Sure. So this is a little bit different than those other ones that were like the positional statements of, hey, this is something that's like on our minds that we believe that we want to talk about. The female pastor's question is actually like a question involving the constitution of the Southern Baptist Convention. So it would be actual changes that could potentially affect the 46,000 Southern Baptist churches that are in the country. So already in the statement of faith for Southern Baptists that they list that they believe that men should be in these lead pastor roles, that it's like a man who's like the preacher or the head of the church. But they wanted something in their constitution that basically says, hey, when we kick out churches, they've listed, I think it's 6 reasons that churches can get kicked out of the Southern Baptist Convention. And they don't like to have a ton of reasons, right? Because they want churches to be able to be independent and do a lot of things. So basically it's like, let's list our real like deal breakers. It's kind of how it goes.
And they want this to be a deal breaker.
They want this to be a deal breaker, even though there's already something that says they have to agree with the statement of faith. So like what happens if we agree with that, but then we do also happen to have a lady who is our Sunday preacher or whatever.
Yeah, so this is, I mean, this may be something I need you to explain
Sure.
to me, and I'll just say my audience or something. Like, I think Rick Warren in Saddleback Church in California, Rick Warren founded that church forever, but also it's not like he's the only pastor there. They have associate pastors who handle different niches, and a couple of those people were women, and I think maybe his successor was a woman as well. But
So
like, what level of woman in the leadership pyramid are they trying to stop?
And so this is part of the confusion, actually. So this is the part of the curiosity. I think that there's some really obvious things that all Southern Baptist folks would kind of agree are off limits, which is lead pastor, senior pastor, top pastor. That guy is,
Has
or
to be a guy.
that guy has to be a guy. And it's normally the teaching pastor, the preaching pastor, the one who's talking every Sunday. That has to be a guy. So now the debate is, if you call someone a pastor, like the children's pastor, the music pastor, but it's clear they're not like that guy.
They're not the top of the pyramid.
Do you still want to fire that person? And so it's this debate over role or title. Or like, hey, if I had someone who was that guy, did preach every Sunday, but I didn't call them pastor, I called them director of teaching. Does that matter? So it is this parsing of language and the reason that some people have opposed it to say, oh, if we overstate it, then is our church secretary, is our Sunday school director, is anyone who's a woman, then have a target on their back.
I've seen some pretty radical, extreme Christian Southern Baptists who are like, well, I went on random church's website, and on their staff page, if you scroll all the way down, I see a woman, and therefore this church needs to be kicked out of the SBC. Stuff like that.
And so I even tried to do a story last year talking to women who serve in Southern Baptist churches who are on staffs. And they're up against a lot in a lot of cases. Like these are, again, male-led denominations and churches where they are supposed to be encouraged in a lot of roles, but sometimes aren't. And nobody wanted to go on the record with me and talk as a woman, even if they were in healthy churches where they felt like they were loved, because they didn't want someone else to see, well, I'm fine doing my role, overseeing curricula or helping with X and Y. And my church is great on this. And I think we meet the letter of the law. Because then if they're quoted on it, who's to say that someone else who has a different interpretation of whether they're too high on the pyramid, as you say, won't then say, well, I hate XYZ church for having this particular person. And then they feel like they're on a literal list of people
Right.
that was once shared.
So they were going to vote on what? No women anywhere on the pyramid? Was that the
So
resolution
I
that
think
was
they don't
brought
want
forth?
women with a title of pastor. A lot of the language was softened to say, hey, we're not going after all women on church staffs. This is not meant to be used. And we're also willing to work with churches that say, hey, we do need to restructure, or we need to use different language. The goal isn't to weed people out, but to like kind of bring churches more in line. But in the process, there have been churches that have said, hey, it's actually really clear that the thing you're aiming for is not what we're about. And so we're going to see ourselves out. And so we've seen that happen, but we've also seen a couple churches, including Saddleback, appeal and be voted out directly, like on
Interesting.
appeal.
So they were voting on this resolution, and what happened with the results of that?
So yeah, it's a constitutional amendment, involves changing the Constitution. So it has a higher threshold. It has to get a 2/3 majority 2 years in a row. So they tried it last year and it got a majority, but not a 2/3. And they tried it again this year. And the thought, and even my expectation, was that it would pass, because essentially there was a church with a female teaching pastor, um, and the committee in charge of kind of checking on them didn't vote them out. And so everyone's like, oh, well, clearly they didn't have enough on the list. It wasn't on the list. We need to put it there so that they'll do it. But even this time, it didn't get the 2/3
It got like 60%, I
threshold. Yeah.
think.
And so basically, we have a majority of people who are kind of for it,
Right.
but
But
not
just not
enough
enough.
to make it over. And I guess that's, how it's designed, that you don't want to always change the Constitution. I will say that things that have been added to this list in the past 10 years, one is racism. And they have kicked out churches for racism, who either preach racist messages, or you can tell like maybe discrimination in staffing or hiring, that are racist. So they have,
Were there a couple churches that like opposed interracial marriage or something like
yes,
that
maybe
too?
that kind of thing too. So that would fall under, so if you are like racist and in a very clear way that they can point to, they'll get you for that. The other is like negligence and abuse cases. If you knowingly hire a pastor who is on, let's say, a sex offender list, or if you have credible allegations that you did not investigate when the time came, they'll kick you out for that too. And so that has been added just in the past few years to the things. And so those things did get the 2/3 majority 2 years in a row. So we know it can be done. It's not like an impossible threshold to meet.
But
But
this didn't cut it.
yeah. And so every year, about a handful, I would say, get kicked out for kind of one of these reasons. Um, and the ones that they investigate but don't get kicked out, they don't release the names so that you're not like suspicious of them. But so people are always curious of, oh, who would be the, did you look into this one or that one?
Right.
Yeah.
It's a giant witch hunt in a sense. I do want to talk about the sexual abuse
Yeah.
stuff. Are they going to bring up the no women pastors like next year, or is it, or have they given up at this point now?
I think that they clearly think that they don't have a good way to define it, and that sense of clarity, but I think they're gonna have to go about it in a different way of, let's rewrite a different document, let's have another
Because this one
clarification.
is not
This
working for
this
them.
this isn't the right mechanism for it, but I think that like felt need with the majority is still there to do something about women pastors.
Okay.
And the other thing is that there if you're a woman pastor, you probably don't want to be in the Southern Baptist Convention. It's a weird it's a weird problem to point to because I really think it is a small minority of churches that are dealing with this. Like I said, a handful a year maybe, and a 46,000.
Right.
Yeah.
So for years now, the SBC has been dealing with the sexual abuse crisis. Where are they at now? What are the survivors thinking? What's leadership thinking? And I made a note of this. I wanted to ask about this too. I know there was a very prominent whistleblower who just died recently as well. And how did that factor into all of this?
Yeah. So, this I think I mentioned Trump being one big theme, and I think abuse is the other big theme for Southern Baptists, and that also is going to be reflected in other churches and denominations. That's important to pay attention to. So, at this point, it's been a few years since the Southern Baptists had voted and approved on doing this investigation of its handling of abuse, and as a result of that, they have incurred huge legal fees. And it's not from abuse survivors who are blaming them for negligence or something. It is leaders who have been credibly accused of abuse, suing the denomination for defamation and essentially like bankrupting the denomination, at least in portion. So they've paid over $13 million in legal fees against to fight cases. Against guys who are accused of abusing people in ministry settings, seminary professors, pastors. There's 3 prominent lawsuits going on right now, and they're investigated by the Department of Justice over this.
And that was under Biden, but under Trump recently, they said, we're done investigating you. Bye.
Right.
Nothing
And
happened.
the DOJ never really revealed the scope of that, other than there was a man indicted for kind of a cover up during just like failing to produce documents.
Yeah.
So there was that, but we didn't really uncover abusers. So
But there was they were thinking about doing a database so that these pastors who are credibly accused can't just move from church to church. That
right.
didn't seem to happen.
And so that is kind of, that was the number one request from survivors for years and years and years, dating back to the early 90s. And they agreed to do it. They voted to approve it. And because of claims of like legal liability of what happens when we put people's names on here, they've just refused to follow up on it. And it's been a huge disappointment to survivors that so much of the talk has been about these lawsuits and liabilities and so little on support and care for survivors. We've seen 2 die in the past 3 weeks. One was a whistleblower against a very prominent Southern Baptist lawyer, and he was male, and was a victim of sexual abuse by this lawyer who kind of held a position of a big influence in the SBC. And the other was this woman, Jen Lyle, who was a SBC executive with the publishing arm, who accused her seminary professor, who was a father figure to her, of sexual abuse. And when it was initially reported, the denomination misreported it as her being in a consensual affair with him. And that kind of caused her life to spiral. But these women are women who I had seen at convention after convention, these annual meetings, would meet with them, and they would just hope for any little recognition of what they have been through. This is the first year that they did not come as a group, and have kind of, well, even before Jen's death, they had planned not to come because they've kind of given up. That the things that they've hoped for, and they've been kind of dragged along and trying to be patient, and it just hasn't come to pass. There are a minority of pastors who have been great advocates and support for these women, who've known them, who came to me and grieved the death of this woman who died at 47 of a stroke, surely under mental duress because of what she has been through. And she was prayed for during the convention. One of her classmates came up and asked for prayer. So her name was mentioned. But in terms of substantial responses, most of it is training and prevention, which is better than nothing. If we have more churches who are better able to identify abusers, surely that is good. And then the other thing is that people are saying anecdotally behind the scenes, there's more pastors being clear with each other about, hey, this guy was fired for X, or this guy was let go in the middle of an investigation. But there's legal liabilities with that. The law only recently changed here in Texas, where you used to not be able to reveal, like, kind of because of HR stuff, like if
Like
someone
why
was
someone
fired.
was fired.
And so they were able to get, I think both here and in Maine, they've passed new laws allowing that to happen. But
Since we're talking about legal liability, uh, correct me if I'm wrong, when they were debating that resolution about women as pastors, was one of the reasons they did not end up voting the 2/3 majority that was needed, was legal liability also a concern there?
right. So one of the lawsuits they face is, I told you how they could kick out churches because of alleged mishandling of abuse. One of those churches, the pastor has sued for defamation for being named as the reason that they were kicked out. And it has to do, and there's also a debate over whether, this was how it was presented. There are other lawyers who are Southern Baptists who say, no, that's not true. But the presentation from the stage by the head of the SBC executive committee, this official who's kind of taken on a lot of the legal stuff, said once you put it in a constitution, which is a governing document, it's different than a statement of faith. And so the statement of faith is a little more off limits in terms of what, like ministerial stuff that the government won't regulate, versus this is like hiring practices and that kind of thing, that it becomes more available as something they could point to as
Sex
discriminatory,
discrimination
and
or
like
something?
have like more they just said legal responsibility, that it opens up to lawsuits. And the other thing is that the lawsuits could be frivolous, right? That people can sue knowing they don't have standing, and it still costs time and
Sure.
money. Yeah.
Not to change the subject, I want to make sure I close up the sexual abuse part, but like I don't remember how many years ago it was when they started publishing article after article. I think the Houston Chronicle was one of
Right.
them about the sex abuse crisis in the church. And that started all these discussions about this is not a hierarchical
Right.
organization like the Catholic Church. How do they handle this? That's what this push was all about.
Yep.
At the end of the day, now, where are they at besides we'll provide some training if you want it, and maybe there's a whisper network among pastors? Is that pretty much the only steps in that direction they've taken, or have there been any serious has there been any serious progress in terms of trying to, I mean, they're not going to be able to put a stop to abuse, unfortunately, because no organization can really do that. But in terms of we're aware of this, and these are the steps we're going to take to make sure someone who is credibly accused is not rewarded for it, is not
Right.
back on our stage in a position of leadership here or elsewhere. Like, if you're a survivor, if you're someone who's been invested in this, what's the thinking? Like, has the SBC done anything tangibly important in the right direction? Or is the SBC now saying too much legal liability? Let's just move on. We've done what we can.
Yeah, I think if you ask a survivor, it's absolutely the latter. It's not even too little too late, it's like nothing too late. And so in terms of concrete actual things that they could do, to call out the folks that they know credibly to have been abusive, even folks that have settlements, or court records stating it, that they, even those won't be listed online. So it's definitely like the worst case scenario of disappointment for survivors. I think if as someone who's covered and talked to pastors through this time, I see some soft wins behind the scene, like you said, a whisper network, or even just a greater understanding of, I think if you would have asked 5 years ago about the nature of spiritual abuse, about abuse between adults, people would say, well, that's an affair, or that's not a real thing. And I think people are really waking up to the fact that that it is abuse. And we even see this from the SBC, which passed a resolution, not this year, I think it was 2 years ago, that said any pastor who has sex with a congregant, whether or not they call it consensual or say it was consensual, is an abuse of power. So they've
Right.
named that. And they've also take a stance for laws that say that. So in some states, just like your doctor or your counselor can't sleep with you legally, like they bar that because of the nature of the relationship. There
Right.
are some
Power
states
dynamic and all that.
that say pastors fall in that category. And they've also, so the Southern Baptists have taken a stance with a resolution saying that they believe all states should should make those relationships illegal, because of like a pastor who's like counseling you or as your minister, that that's a power dynamic where it amounts to sexual abuse and names it as sexual abuse. So I think that's a change in thinking that kind of can't be sold. Like that's a
They
huge
don't need a resolution for that. That's a shift in how they are thinking about this in general.
Yeah, and I think that just for people to acknowledge that, hey, just because two adults are having sex doesn't mean it's an affair. That the pastor here could be the guilty party, and you don't need to be shaming a woman over it, which would have been absolutely the kind of word of the day for a while. And so because of that, you're getting to see more folks come forward and a greater empathy, sympathy, you know, leaning to believe survivors. Obviously, there are still people who say it's all too costly and it's just a legal mess. And I worry that other denominations see what happened to the Southern Baptists and say, we don't want to do an investigation. Like we like a
Why
donut
set ourselves
hotel.
up to
We
get
don't want to
sued?
know. Like this, yeah,
Right.
all they're doing is I mean, the Southern Baptists have sold their building, have cut staff, all to pay for these lawsuits.
Again, not to change the subject, I've got a couple more,
Sure.
hopefully quick questions for you. One is the SBC. One of the things I do appreciate that they do publish their numbers every year. And when I saw that data recently, it didn't look great for them. Membership numbers, as we mentioned earlier, are going down.
Yeah.
That's been a trend for several years now. The spin from the SBC is that no, it's picking up because there are more baptisms than ever before. I think more church plants
Mhm.
than ever before. Um, is it fair, do you think, as someone who's covering them, is that fair for me to say that they're spinning the data to say, like, but look at the baptisms? Or is it just fair to say, no, I see the membership, it's going down. That's really the only thing that matters here. Like, I kind of looked at, oh, you're saying the baptisms went up. I mean, I don't care.
Yeah.
I saw the membership numbers going down. I'm like, that doesn't look great for them. Or am I missing something? Like, do they
I
actually care more about the baptisms than the
Right.
membership?
And when I've reported on these numbers each year, it is a on the one hand, on the other hand, this is up, this is down, and you do see that. This year, I was a little more sympathetic to the spin because church attendance is up significantly. Um, and so
Even if membership is down, the
even if
percentage of
membership is
people
down.
going.
And so the explanation for that is the idea that they're still in a period of like, I think they call it hygiene of the membership rolls. Basically, churches are cutting out people who are no longer active members. That there are all these people who once just belonged to the church for the sake of it, and that they still see this as we're getting rid of those who did
We're
it.
just cleaning up the
Right,
roster. That's why the
right.
membership
So
numbers are
that is
going
their
down.
explanation. But the other thing is that I don't know that I trust or know any of the numbers as a trend because we're still in COVID rebound.
Sure.
So anything's an increase over post-COVID.
Okay.
And so I'm kind of waiting and seeing. That said, try to find another denomination that's doing better. I'm
Yeah.
serious. I mean, some of the Assemblies of God are seeing some growth, but if you look at mainline denominations which have suffered decline much longer, the numbers are so much more severe. The problem with Southern Baptist statisticians will tell you is that they're going to die out. That basically they can't convert enough people for how many people are gonna die. And that's also like a pastoral crisis too of will there
Yeah.
be enough people to inherit the pulpits? Is the pipeline really going to come with
That
new
was an interesting thing they talked about as well, I think, at this convention meeting, which was the succession problem. Are there enough young pastors eager to take over the churches that still exist? And like, are they working to draw in more people? Or what's keeping young men from wanting to become pastors? Because I mean, my complaints about it are probably not their concerns.
Well, I mean, it's a hard job. The burnout is a big thing and was a thing that we are so much more attuned to mental health everything that pastors are a lot more sensitive to, hey, this is like weighing on my family and is making me suicidal. Not all of it, but for folks that maybe in past generations were like grin and bear it and like go through and this is your job forever. There's a lot of folks who say, you know what, I'm out. Like this isn't for me anymore. This isn't a healthy dynamic. I've got to go. And so I think people spend shorter amount of times at pastor jobs. And it's something I've wanted to report on for CT, this like pastor to consultant pipeline that a lot of times people
Really?
don't leave ministry altogether. They just become like ministry consultants. So they like coach other pastors or hold workshops or do
I
kind of
mean, that
general
happens in politics
in the
too.
Christian world. Yeah. And so, but the idea of leading a church is actually really hard now. Like it's a demanding job, it's divisive, it's emotionally draining. And is there enough support for that? Do you have a good enough network to sustain that? So I think that it's not necessarily that people don't feel called or don't care about churches. It's just hard. And
And more people
I'm
are
more
talking
honest
about
about
that
it.
now.
Yeah.
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 Last question for you, which is the current president of the SBC, Clint Presley. I believe he was just reelected for a second year, which is typical,
Mhm.
usually a 2-year term. He was reelected pretty easily. I have not heard his name very much outside the bubble over the past year compared to, was it Bart
Bart
Barber?
Parker.
Yeah,
Yeah.
who was constantly in the news, I thought, relatively speaking.
Yeah.
I'm just wondering, as a journalist, how has his tenure been? Because he doesn't necessarily control what they're debating, what the issues are, but how has he been compared to the previous people? What are the issues? What's he bringing to the table that people like or don't like, or is
Yeah.
he's just a leader? He's in the background.
Yeah. So Clint Presley is a pastor from North Carolina. I would say if I had to put him on a spectrum, and again, it depends on who you ask, I think he's a notch on the conservative side, more on the more like not all the way, but enough that folks who are very conservative still would respect him, but not he's not so far gone that the folks that are less very conservative don't. So he's in a good place in the middle. And so I think people really commended his moderation of the meeting, thought he was really fair, gave everyone a good shot. He is not super outspoken in any way. He doesn't answer questions with like great big explanations. He's kind of a just the facts ma'am kind of guy. He doesn't, I think, want any more attention than the level that he is getting, which is kind of fine. He opened the meeting with a joke of it's such an honor to be here, to be the president of the Southern Baptist Convention, a title that sounds like a lot but really means nothing. Like he really downplayed like this is a role to lead the meeting and to have a figurehead
I'm
for
just a humble
a
servant.
couple years. And so I don't think that you're going to see him kind of move and shake and insert himself. I think some of it might have been Bart's personality. He was very online. That's what helped him get elected. He has kind of this folksy persona. He like names his cows in Texas after famous Southern Baptists and like walks in the field and tells little stories. So he himself already just had a thing.
Yeah.
And he also was the president during the peak of the abuse crisis. And so
So he was constantly in the
he was
news.
on a bunch of task force that happened throughout the year that required updating, and that was when there really was kind of some momentum
Yeah.
and on that front that stalled, but he also got more criticism from that, so then he had to defend himself. So some of it might have just been the issues of the day and his personality, but overall, I don't think anyone's mad or disappointed with Clint. He won handedly, the reelection. Usually you
I
run
think there
for
was another nominee who was like
unopposed.
a firebrand right wing,
Yes.
I mean, more right wing guy and
Yeah,
lost
so
completely.
there's a site Protestia, which is, the kind of site where they would accuse Christianity Today of being some liberal rag or whatever. So
They've said plenty about me too. It's great.
they put their targets right all over and kind of fire at will. I'll be honest that I didn't even know that the guy who ran that would be in the room or was a Southern Baptist. I know he talks about Southern Baptists, but he talks about everybody. So it was funny to hear his name and to hear him
So he
described
was
as he was
nominated and
nominated
he was up
from
on the
the
ballot.
stage. Yep. And I think he got 6% of the vote, which is, I mean, it's hundreds of people. Um,
Yeah.
so, but yeah, so that was the interesting election. But I think Clint he'll be president one more annual meeting, and then we'll see. It's always a little more contentious. election year, because then you kind of see the factions of, oh, which guys are kind of gunning for which other guys. But that'll be
Right.
interesting.
Fantastic. Thank you so much for your time. I really appreciate it. Kate, where can people find the work that you're doing and where can they find you?
Sure. So I'm at Kate Shellnutt on Twitter, or X. I live tweet the annual meeting every year. I'm also the same on Blue Sky. If you're looking for a kind of centrist evangelical news source, you can always check out ChristianityToday.com. We cover Christians around the globe, and we also translate into like 16 languages. We've got a lot of readers internationally, so if that's something that you're into, check us out.
And I will just add, I really do appreciate and respect the news coverage I see in Christianity Today. So it's solid stuff. Thank you so much for your time. I appreciate it. And thank you to everyone for joining us and asking questions and commenting. And I'll be back tomorrow for the usual weekly live stream. Thank you so much.